Good evening. You're listening to the Extreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Alongside me tonight, I have from the Central Florida area, like myself, the young 20-something Professor Pixel. And in our continuing expose on the Prisoner TV show, we are on season 1, episode 12. And Pixel, I have to sit there and say we've gone through a few pivots in the show over the past 11 episodes or so. We've seen a lot of, oh, this episode's got Rover and Goofy T scenes in it. Oh, these couple episodes have him escaping but being brought back. Lately, though, we're in what I would call the drug phase of it, because not only do we get tremendous amounts of drugs and drugging and electroshock lobotomy type stuff going on in this episode, we have just insane amounts of violence, especially for 50s TV. And yes, it's the 60s, can't be sped up goofy kind like you'd see in Goldfinger from James Bond. But while I wasn't particularly fond of the subject material in this particular episode, I liked how this episode was different because there's a lot of violence, especially starting off because we get Jim Cotta, the origins of the great Scott Kurt Thomas, whatever the hell his name is, from the 80s Jim Cotta ninja movie, where, you know what, I see where they got inspired from, and it comes from this episode. But in an all serious moment, we get a lot of mob violence in here too. So this one's actually kind of creepy with the social media aspect of it, gaslighting number 6 to kind of use a different avenue to break him. What did you initially think of this episode?
No, I definitely see that. Um, with this episode, I'm just going to go ahead and say there's a theme that now exists where number 6 does not try to escape anymore. He's done trying to escape. All he does is thwart the plots around him. And it's definitely odd because I do like it. I do prefer it, but I think there's something about the order that we're following, which is the main order if you look for the series anywhere, um, that just doesn't gel. I feel like it would have been better if some of these later episodes were spliced in between the escape episodes just to keep something fresh. But uh, enough of that. Let's actually talk about what happens in this episode. Um, this one, after the usual beginning, number 6 is exercising. He has his own little gym set up in the woods, and he's doing okay until these two, uh, villagers come on in and saying that he is, well, why don't you use the gym in town? You're being antisocial. Why would you do that? And a fight just breaks out. And number 6 does come up on top, but because of that, he is called in to be seen by the council. Um, and actually, this beginning is one of my favorites. He's just sitting there. He has this woman right by him who's uncontrollably crying, and you can hear the council talking to somebody inside. It's a random number. But ultimately, they're saying that we have to deal with number 6. He needs help. And number, whatever the woman's number is, she's uncontrollably sobbing right now because she's so upset. We must help her. You're wasting our time. And so eventually, the guy being seen by the council comes on out, and he's told through the speaker, we will tell you what to say. And he admits that he's inadequate, and he is not as involved as he should be, and he's sorry. And after that, he just goes ahead. He gets a round of applause from everybody around, and he goes into the council room. And I'll take a breath there.
Well, we saw this exercise equipment before when you unleashed some deadly violence, but the real deadly violence in the previous episode that just brought us to tears was the Kosho scenes, the extended cut, if you were. And so, again, in late 60s dated film terms, it's hard not to laugh a little bit in a way, but it is what it is, and you have to accept it. What was creepy to me about this episode is that in other episodes we've seen where when they take some themes seriously and everything's clicking, because the acting is usually pretty spot on, but sometimes some of the obviously set pieces don't do it the justice deserves. It kind of breaks your believability in it. Unfortunately, I think this episode suffers from it because this episode could have been fantastic, and I think the ending sucks. But the things that lead up to it are great because, again, we have violence to start the episode off, which we don't normally get. We don't normally get actually a lot of violence. Maybe the occasional fisticuff with jazz music, which is kind of interesting, but it's not over the top. And here he's doing his gym equipment. He's got his punching bag, and if you look closely, I believe I see parallel rings as well. But he even chokes one of the guys out with it too. And again, it's kind of corny sounding, but these horribly horizontal striped bad guys are the equivalent of the red shirts from the original Star Trek. As far as something bad's gonna happen, and they're the goon squad. And unfortunately, most of the people in this episode have those uniforms on. I don't know if that's accidental or not, but it seems intentional. And the reason why I bring this up is because this is something I thought they would have done to number 6 early on, meaning the people in charge of the village, how they're implementing their plans. Because there's a line in here where the disgusting number 2, who's like always like seeming like he's snacking on something with crumbs running down his face. He's kind of a bum, where the other number 2s have their own air of English indifference or whatever you would call it style. And this guy's a little different. He's creepy, but he does it really good. But the line in here about, well, now everybody's ostracized from him. Let's see what real loneliness feels like. And that's a little later on in the episode. The idea that to take away what he's established, meaning his morning coffee, tea, chess games, and his exercise routine, what we had heard about earlier, I thought this would have been much more appropriate early on. And one of the first few episodes, we talked about how we saw a little shot of him looking at people getting mentally worked on in the psychology room there when he's in the hospital. And so now he's not escaping, to your point. So things have to be done a bit more subversive, or in this case, out in the open, when it's a little bit of both. They concoct a plan to basically say, we're going to turn everybody against you socially, so nobody will talk to you, and it's going to wear on you, and we're going to break you, and we're going to find out why it is you resigned early. And to me, when I saw a theme like that, I go, oh, how effective can that really be? But when we've talked about how the show doesn't really try to use a lot of violence, but then they also don't try to use a lot of like sexuality in it, I think that's smart because it's not dumbing it down where it could be very easy to go, oh, well, James Bond would do it. Why doesn't he do it? Or any of those things. And so early on, we just go, yeah, the way they're doing everything's different. And that makes it refreshing. There is that humor in there where we hear the setup of what's going on when he has to report to the commission. And they basically say, hey, you're not here to defend yourself, because that's obviously not something that happens. So this is very socialist in a way, if you want to call it that, or fascist or whatever. And he's defiant, and he's not buying anything they have to say. And unfortunately, all the people in this round table are dressed in those horrible shirts, so they look really, really goofy too. So it's hard to take the tone serious. And for me, when this really picked up was that once they all leave, basically, we see the vertically challenged butler come in, and we're starting to physically see him more and more, but not just in the backgrounds or foregrounds. We see him here coming out, letting him out. And we see how the person that was in there before him came out, and we know that the committee is making this person confess and say certain things there too. It's kind of like the analogous of what we would get in today's modern world when a company would release a statement by their lawyer saying, we take these allegations very serious, and we want to know blah, 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 and let everybody blah, blah. And it's just word salad. And here it's like, wow, they're going to make you confess, and then they're going to tell you what to say because they don't want people buying into you. And to go about accomplishing this task, they're having news articles printed up about you instantaneously. People are giving the stink eye and all that. And you got number 2 coming in basically saying, hey, there's nothing I can do. And oh, by the way, here's this blonde woman, number 86, who's had a lot of experience. So he's trying to let number 6 know, I'm going to try to help you. I'm going to try to curry favor onto you or whatever. It's, almost prison-like in a sense. And I don't mean that as a joke, but she's real pissy with the guy and all that too. So they go through all the little things about, the small little group that might stand up for him that she knows, and he's not buying any of it. So we know all this, right? But then things start to take a little bit of a turn later on when he starts meeting some people at the hospital that have a little mark on their head, and they've been basically lobotomized. And then he goes and he looks into the room that we've talked about a few times, the aversion therapy room, with people who are basically being forced to watch images, giving some basic electroshock therapy. And while I miss Rover a tremendous amount for a certain amount of cheese factor and terror, this one guy screaming in pain for it, it doesn't help this episode because it is creepy. But some of the scenes are, got that camp factor to it that really take it apart. But the really cool scene after all this is he's walking around the village on his regular routine, trying to talk to people and just say hello and all that, looking around, and people won't speak to him. They won't answer the phone. And then we get a group of women that come to his door, led by number 56 and a bunch of pissy women and all that. And I'll pause there so you can pick it up.
Yeah, no, number 86, she might be my favorite random woman.
Really?
Just thrown in. We gotta have an attractive woman. Yes. Well, I'm quite happy. But you're absolutely right. With all that happening, 86 looks to be pretty much involved in a lot of the immersion therapy that's being applied. And with the threat of that looming, because number 6 is basically told he has to shape up or he will be, pretty much lobotomized. And with him trying to get in with the community, my favorite scene is when they're in the woods and it's almost like a mock debate between two people about how something should be handled.
Right.
And number 6, for a moment he's quiet, but then he starts making comments and he is clearly not getting along, and it's just so funny to see. And with that being shunned by the community, he is eventually just not going to have a choice. Like, my favorite point is when he talks to number 2. Number 2 it gives him a threat of social conversion once more, and after that, he goes ahead, hangs up the phone. He goes to sit right outside of his little place.
Yep.
And that's when the entire village just start coming up and hitting him with umbrellas.
It was shocking, right? I mean, we don't
Yeah.
expect this level of violence, but we also don't expect it from basically, well, it's, how do I say it? That group of women, they were militant. And the group that's beating them down, it's like, okay, this is a joke. They're just bitching at him or like that. But no, they don't. They thrash his ass.
Yeah.
That was that left field for me. I wasn't expecting that. And I like that because of that. That's different, right?
Yeah. No, I did like that. I did enjoy that. And getting to go from there, he undergoes social conversion. And there is a treatment. It's basically going to dig into the front of his brain and melt it down, something like that. And it's going to pretty much lobotomize him. But it seems that like it doesn't take. At least it does for the next few minutes, because when he wakes up, he is extremely well-mannered and he's nice and slow in his actions, looking around, and 86 is right there to welcome him to the new world and offers to make him a cup of tea. He needs his rest. And that's when number 6 is watching, and he is, while being well-mannered, he is watching as she's drugging his tea. Just totally rude. So when she brings it back, there's a moment of talking to each other, but at 1 second, 86 pretty much turns around and number 6 tosses the tea into a potted plant. And, well, I'll go ahead and stop right there. It's a whole new world.
Yeah, the angry group working kind of, like I say, is a big contrast to some of the camp elements in here, which I don't think they're trying to be camp. And so, like, for example, even though I thought this should have been attempted earlier on so we could see it, we could see him gelling with the citizens of the village, then you take that away in certain ways, like they're doing in this episode, it'd be more powerful. And here, the fact that he's sitting at the table that he normally sits at, that we've become almost familiar with him doing, we just haven't seen it in recent episodes. That's pretty powerful. So little things like that can be really, really great scenes. And the whole idea of this social conversion is that, yeah, we just want you to be like the rest of us, and we'll help you be that way. And it's very frightening because what they're trying to do is neutralize the like aggressive center of his brain, and that's the lobotomization procedure. And to me, when he's going back and forth with number two, I don't know. It's not about number two in this episode, even though we of course have a newer number two, a different one. But when he's getting beat down by the crowd, that's what brings him there into it. And the blonde that's basically performing this procedure, she's gets the freaky deaky eye kind of sort of at him while she's doing it. So it's like, is she lusting after him? Is she a part of the plan? Is she got the hots for him? This is number 86. And I noticed, wow, she's a striking blonde. We've noticed that we've had a lot of fairly attractive women, but in the village, sexuality doesn't necessarily stand out. Not that they're always wearing slacks, but actually I think they are. But it's that 60s kind of style, so there's no real dresses or anything like that. But the look she has in her face is we're being shown that, okay, she's really into him and watching what's going on. And the one thing that I think is key about this whole procedure is not the crappy medical procedure that they're performing and the way it looks and how dated it is. It's the fact that they're televising it for everybody so they can gain instant um, power, if you want, in a way. And it's like editing film clips or news clips today. News clips always carry around a pair of shoes to throw up in places and for that the body's been hit, and all sorts of dirty tactics. But it's PR, emotional sabotage 101. And I like that. That was creepy. It wasn't him getting lobotomized, because he's really not. The whole point to hear that number two is basically doing is we're going to treat him like he's being lobotomized, and we're going to use drugs so he thinks it and all that too. Because of course, at this point, they still haven't said we have to, destroy his brain. They can't do that yet. At least they're not up to that point. So that's the whole kind of thing to the whole episode. But we notice him kind of go under with that stupid little smile to it. And even though it's all explained to us, it's not terrifying. It's probably went on a little too long. The only noteworthy thing is that when he comes to, it's funny because she's got the look. And I'm like, who is this woman? Number 86. And I believe if I researched her correctly, she's been in some Hammer horror films as, I don't know if she was in Brides of Dracula or some of those, but she's got that kind of come hither look to her. And I'm like, she stood out, and it kind of grew on me too, because it's the way these shows were filmed back then. It wasn't in your face like it. And then of course we see her come to the room with him, and when he sees her making tea, that's where she's slipping him Namiki, the drug in it. And what's cool about some of these shots is how when they zoom in and all that, you see what he's trying to do too. And of course, this is probably the least effective number two that we've had. But I like these little moments because we said there's a lot of cultural things that go on in the show, and the British part of it is having the tea and coffee and all that. And he makes the comment, and I have to bring this up before I pass it back to you, is that he says, well, I can't stand a woman that doesn't know how to make a spot of tea. So he's like, get the sugar please. And that's when he slips it. Two things. One, because he's being watched by everybody in the control room, and especially by that creepy dude, they would have seen that, I think, even though his back's to him a little bit. I just feel like they would have. It seemed kind of lazy, or at least the way they did all that. Because she ends up getting drugged, of course, because he's starting to realize, oh, wait a minute, nothing really happened. But the other thing, too, is number two, he's bitching about women, like, oh, women, if they screw this up, it's like, well, wait a minute, bro, you're not in charge of your own plan. I mean, what's going on? And, a lot of times when people talk about, socialism in the United States, they talk about McCarthyism and Hollywood and communists and how they've infiltrated the United States since the turn of the century. And no matter how you take or feel that, politically speaking, personally speaking, it definitely happened, and it's definitely there. And then here, we're made to think that number two it's like, who can come up with a scheming kind of idea and like, okay, we'll let him try that, but if it doesn't work, we're gonna take care of him. And we've seen that with all these number twos. And so less number two in this episode would have, I think, been a much better thing too. Um, but this girl comes out of nowhere, like we say, she's playing a certain role, and now it's changing because she's the one that's trying to figure out, how to get him under, and she seems more invested in the number two. It's kind of weird that way because a lot of times the number twos, either they felt like they were really strong in charge, or they were neutered by the women that were involved in it. And I don't know what to make of that, but I thought it was very prevalent, worth mentioning. Your take, sir.
Well, I actually forgot to mention about number two. I actually really enjoyed this number two. I think the actor has a vibe to him that
He
fits
does. I
that
don't know if
role.
it's a sleaze vibe, but it is different. You know what I mean?
He's almost too sly for his own good.
Yeah.
But with his presence here, yeah, no, I mean, it's like he's going ahead and he's letting 86 do whatever she wants. And with that, he's getting really worried that it's going to be screwed up. But, as the time continues, as it were, we ultimately see, because number six is able to slip the T around, he's able to almost subdue 86 at one point. And with her basically drugged up, he goes ahead and decides, you know what I'm going to do? Something we haven't done for 3 episodes? 3 episodes. Hypnotize you.
Oh boy.
Usually it's the village doing the hypnotizing, I'll be fair. But no, this time he goes ahead, takes his watch, and tells 86, just watch. Just keep looking at it, stare. And he gives some instructions. And this is when number six seems to have a plan. After this, he goes ahead and decides to visit number two and says that he is so happy of how everything has gone, how he's feeling now, that he wants to confess to the entire village. He thinks if he does that, then the entire village will want to do the same. And number two is like, oh, okay, all right, I like the sound of this. And he basically arranges a meeting right at the town hall. And number two is standing there with number six. Number six starts addressing the village, and as he keeps going, slowly number two seems to be, his suspicions, you can tell in his eyes that something's not quite right.
Right.
As number six goes on, but he's not going to do anything because he's already in that position. He can't shut it down. And eventually, number six gets to the end of his praises as the clock chimes. And that's when number 86, still hypnotized, arrives, points at number two, and he is unmutual. Number two is unmutual. And that's when number six is able to take the mic, and he goes ahead and just tells everybody that he is going against the system, and he is in fact unmutual. In the village, on cue, they chase number two, who is forced to return back to his home. And yeah, no, this is pretty much an end. I mean, number six wins, chases number two out, and we'll probably never see this one again. But yeah, no, that's an end, and the end isn't bad. I think it's fair. I just wish, like you mentioned earlier, if this was an earlier episode, I think that this was the first plot that number six has to thwart, as it were, instead of just trying to escape for the upteenth time, it would have been far better. But no, as it stands on its own, it's definitely interesting. It's a fair episode.
It's, a couple things here. I think the actress I misplaced for somebody else as far as being in Hammer Horror, because I'm sure there's some crossover here, so I'll have to check into that. But they're not. I just found it odd that number two, had this anti-female kind of perspective to it, and we've seen that females do think differently, and they brought a different perspective in how they were going to approach breaking the prisoner. And normally this show does a good job of not being lazy and rising up to the level of the challenge that's presented as far as writing and stuff too. And despite some of the sets being really small and tiny and obvious, there's still some good shots in here. There's a shot in here where right around the lobotomy procedure, when he's out walking by himself or whatever, and he looks up and he stops at the top of the hill by his workout equipment. He looks out and sees like a flock of geese moving on or whatever. I thought, oh, is he going to somehow figure out a way to get off the island because of that, or that kind of remind him of something? And I don't know that the scene really was pertinent to the episode or a particular theme necessarily, unless maybe it reminded him of, hey, I gotta keep my head high and get to outside and escape. But I like the way they cut and showed those kinds of things. And little touches like that make a big deal. Like it would be easy for him to develop a love interest from the earlier episode, and then shock and horror, the girl turns on him, in the next to last episode, and she's really the one trying to get the information all along, and stupid stuff. I mean, we're much too smart for that these days. But to have him do little things like, we saw him play chess with the old admiral who basically said, yeah, I am old and this is going to be the last place, so I am going to make the most of it. And it was there in that chair that happened, and other scenes where he sat there and people have watched him from behind, or he's had conversations, or like the one that fell in love with him that was programmed to do that was also met him in that same area. Those are things that we go, oh yeah, that's right. It sucks when you get used to your spot, whether you're parking or eating, and somebody takes it away, you get pissed, even though it's not yours, that you become attached to it. So I thought this episode had a lot of promise for what they were trying to show us and get done, but it leaned a little bit too much more, I felt, into the social media group part. And even though the crowd beating the crap out of them was done well, um, when something like that happens for effect, I would like to see that linger for a couple episodes or two, and maybe it will. Who knows? We'll see when we get to the next episode next week. But for me, once he goes to hypnotize her and give her some directions, I just thought, this is lazy. It's crap. I didn't like it. I did pause my screen a couple times to try to see if that's supposed to be a Rolex or not, and it's not. But I just thought, that's just too camp for me. And I don't mind a little silliness. I know the Rover's a big bouncing ball on an air machine, but it's weird in its own way and good enough. But I just didn't care for it, and it just seemed like a rushed ending to it, where all of a sudden number two is set up to be ostracized and not him. So it looks like he's now back on their side. And again, you get your ass beat by a crowd that's not drugged up, allegedly, and you get played off like a pawn so much by them. Then to kind of get back in their good graces just felt a little rushed there at the end, and I did not like the ending at all. I thought they could have done so much more with it, and they just didn't, and it felt rushed to me. So I didn't care for that ending, but overall I did enjoy the episode as well, for a lot of the ways that was different than some of the other episodes and what they were trying to do with it. I think obviously the idea is that if you'd redo it today, you could still do these themes, but you just have to modernize them. And what makes the prisoner effective? You mentioned this earlier, and I think it's a great point. We've seen him basically be in opposition verbally, physically. Then we saw him basically try to communicate with people that are in there that he may have had some previous relationships before. Those are gone. We've seen him actually physically leave. It's like, oh shit, he's out. No, he's back. So now what's left? Now it's just, I've got nobody to talk to. I've got nowhere to run. Now I just need to confront my captors, and that's it. So I like how that's seeming to be set up to get played out. And there's definitely, I think, a very strong hint of number two basically being the manager that nobody respects or listens to, because they're just going to be replaced there, which happens in real life a lot. You shut your mouth and you survive the person that's there, and maybe the next one's a little bit better for your tastes and all that. So it makes me wonder who the real power behind the village is, and are we ever going to know? Because after all, it could be from both sides, and they all know what's going on, and does seem like it's a new world order kind of thing. But yeah, it is a pretty good episode. There's some strong performances in there. You got the creepy vibe from number 2. The lady was very strong in it. McGowan's always pretty good. I thought he wasn't here too, but definitely different. I mean, really, I got to give it credit for that. It felt that way, and that surprised me. I didn't think we'd get something that would be so blatantly, you know, violent. Like I said, it's pretty neat. And of course, at the end, the one thing we didn't mention is, he kind of rediscovers his violent side and all that because he's backed by his gym equipment, and the same thugs that got their ass beat by him early on come to do the same thing again. They're like, you're not going to be able to do it now, right? And then he still beats them up. So that was
Yep.
cute. The bullies get their comeuppance yet again. So, any other thoughts?
No, I mean, we only have, what, 5 episodes now?
Yippers. So we're rounding that corner.
Yep, and then once we're at our end, we will have to give our thoughts on the series as a whole. Right now, as it stands, it does have a lot going for it as far as the themes and the series themselves, trying to keep things fresh and interesting. The simple fact of the matter is, though, that right now we are stuck in the same cycle. It's a new cycle, but it's still the same cycle, and that's the only really problem. But the episode on its own has its standing. And that's what we have going for it.
Yeah, and I think the show's definitely pointing out, different ways of approaching some similar themes, right? It really has nothing to do with him actually escaping the island, and I think that's should be very apparent. And I can see where this being totally different when it came on was very striking. And of course, if you're British or European, with everything that went on with World War II and everything after that, and how all the world's changed since then and gotten more magnified, we still have old cultural issues that spring up everywhere too, and reasonings and economic things and all that too. But again, for 50, 55 years ago to point out these kind of things on public television, I mean, that I can only imagine something like that would actually be a shocking that they could put on TV today that we haven't, joked about or heard about too. And that's one of the things that still surprises me about the show is that not only they're willing to do that and be so precise about it, it was done 50 to 55 years ago, and a hell of a lot of people watched it and could get with that what's going on. And now it's, you know, now it just seems like, can you separate something? It's not as, you know, like, oh my God, I would have never thought of that sort of thing too. And for to unveil those kinds of things to the general public, man, what a mind fuck. But yeah, good episode. Hope it continues here too. Things are picking up a little bit. All right. I'd like to thank everybody for listening to The Prisoner Season 1, Episode 12. And of course, Professor Pixel for joining me. And we'll be looking forward to doing Episode 13 as we start turning that third base, heading to the home run here for The Prisoner, one of the best TV shows of all time, before we pick on another particular show after that. So for Professor Pixel, myself, your host Rob here on the Xtreme Movie Show and Xtreme TV, have a good night. And as always, be seeing you.
Be seeing you.